In this lecture, the major segments of a scientific research paper will be described, followed by an outline of the somewhat involved process for writing and rewriting research papers. Suggestions for selecting an appropriate title, determining author order, and constructing an abstract are provided. The body of a paper, which will be described in some detail, includes an introduction, equipment and procedures, results, discussion, and conclusions. These sections of the paper state why the research was done, how it was carried out, and what the results and implications are. Following the body of the paper are the acknowledgments and references. These sections recognize the work done by others that contribute to the research. Once the text, along with its associated pictures and tables, has been drafted, a series of reviews improve the paper. These reviews usually shorten the paper by removing superfluous material, making the paper more specific, and refine the wording and format of the paper. After a final check for proper grammar and punctuation, the paper is sent to external reviewers who provide a fresh set of eyes to catch lingering errors, which may in some case require major revisions to the paper. With these changes made, the paper is submitted to the journal for publication. The scientific community has developed a standard set of sections for a research paper. The overall content that should be included in each section is well defined, although the specifics, of course, vary from one paper to the next. Some students may already be familiar with the general outline of a scientific paper, as it is similar to many lab reports. However, some critical sections, such as the abstract, acknowledgments, and references, are not treated in traditional science classes. Each of the segments will be described and should be included in a scientific paper that reports research results. Naturally, the first thing anyone is going to read in a scientific paper is its title. As such, it should pique the interest of potential readers. However, science papers are very concise and there is little room for embellishing language. For instance, in the case of double-star astrometry, one cannot insert frivolous opinions regarding the aesthetics of a particular double-star system. Rather, what gets researchers excited about a particular study is what it contributes to the field. An astronomical research project often focuses on a particular target and uses a specific observing technique. As such, the title could be a sentence fragment that highlights the key points of the paper: the name of the target object, the type of measurements done, and occasionally the telescope or institutions involved. The title should be interesting and tell the reader exactly what to expect. The authors are individuals who contributed significantly to a research project. Their contribution may range from making observations, doing statistical or other analysis, leading a team, or writing the paper. It is not unusual for someone who is not an original team member to end up contributing significantly to a paper. They should be included as a co-author. If someone only contributed a small amount, such as reviewing the paper or giving general guidance, their contribution and name should appear in the acknowledgments, not as an author. The order of the authors is by far the most politically sensitive aspect of a published paper. It is generally assumed that the first author, sometimes called the lead author, did the most work and carries the primary responsibility for the research, including assuring that the paper gets submitted for publication and following up on post-publication chores, such as making sure all of the co-authors receive a copy of the final paper. If the students in the team did most of the work and they shared the work roughly equally, then listing them in alphabetical order by last name would be appropriate. If one student did an unusual amount of work and was also the clear team leader, then this student should be the first author, while the others might be listed in alphabetical order. An instructor or some other person may be the largest contributor to the project. They should be included as an author. They can be the first author, but may defer to students and ask to be placed last. The corresponding author is responsible for interfacing with the journal and carrying the paper through the last steps of publication. The corresponding author is usually the first author, but it may be appropriate for someone else to be the corresponding author to handle any questions that come up during publication and check the proof copies for correctness. The institution of each author should be given below their names. These affiliations may be schools, corporations, branches of government, or nonprofits. A student's affiliation would be their school, while a professional researcher deeply involved in a project may be affiliated with an observatory or university. The abstract is the most often read part of a science paper, as it summarizes most of the critical questions a researcher would ask. What was being studied? Why is this research important? Who did it and how was it done? What were the results? The abstract is almost always written last because it addresses all of the key points of the paper, including abbreviated results and conclusions. Some students may be surprised that in science, the story's plot is given away before the body of the paper even begins. The abstract is there to save researchers time skim reading an entire paper to see if it is relevant to their own research. The title may intrigue them, but the abstract ensures that the paper will be of use to them. The abstract should be brief. Typically, a journal will limit the abstract to 250 words. Briefer is better. The introduction describes who carried out the project and why this particular project was done. The introduction usually places the current research in a historical context, describing, in the case of double star observations for instance, who discovered the double star. The introduction should tell the reader how this research project will contribute to the field. There should be references to work others have done in the past that set the stage for the present study. The most important part of the introduction, though, is the enumeration of specific scientific research goals. Occasionally, a paper will have a specific hypothesis to test, although this is unusual for an observational paper. In laboratory experiments, such as in chemistry, the next section of the scientific research paper is often called Materials and Methods. For astronomical research, this would rarely be appropriate, so a section title of Equipment and Procedures or something similar is more fitting. The Equipment and Procedures portion of the paper consists of two distinct sections. First, all of the tools used in the project should be described. This typically includes the telescopes and the eyepieces or camera used to make the observations, as well as the location and dates that the observations were made. The software used to control the telescope and camera and to reduce the data should be credited here as well. Anything used that does not significantly contribute to the procedure should be left out, such as LED lights and warm clothing. Second, the methods of data collection, reduction, and calibration should be outlined in enough detail that someone with a basic knowledge of telescope and eyepiece or camera operation could replicate the observations. For example, if a CCD camera was used to make astrometric measurements of double stars, the procedure's description can skip the steps of camera installation, but need to describe the measurement procedures. Professional researchers may just name standard techniques and give a citation. In contrast, student papers may want to describe some basic principles behind the procedures. For instance, subtracting darks or rotating an eyepiece might be explained. Giving reasons why a particular technique is used increases the readability of this section. It is sometimes appropriate to describe the statistical analyses used. In terms of the length of the text, the results section is often the shortest segment of a scientific paper. It may be tempting to begin interpreting the results in this section, but this section only contains the measurements themselves and perhaps some accounting of their accuracy and/or precision. Raw data should not be included. The results typically include tables, images, or light curves. The means, standard deviations, and standard errors of the mean are often given for observational data. Ultimately, the content of the discussion section depends entirely on the research question at hand. The discussion section focuses on answering the research question. In the discussion section, comparisons may be made between the present study and past observations. Here, the authors may wish to establish trends in the data or identify deviations. The last part of the paper's body is the conclusion. The conclusion relates the results and discussion back to the goals stated in the introduction. One rule for reviewing a paper is to read the introduction and conclusion and see if they mirror each other or not. If the conclusions do not address the issues brought up in the introduction, then one or the other part of the paper should be amended. A vital aspect of the conclusions is to avoid introducing any new information or reasoning. However, an exception is future research possibilities. These potential areas of research should be specific rather than a general statement such as, "This double star needs more follow-up observations." While the other sections of the paper are very straightforward, facts-only material, the acknowledgments section offers the opportunity to be slightly less formal in style. It is appropriate to thank those who contributed to the project who are not an author. Authors, obviously, shouldn't thank themselves. Anyone who reviewed the paper should be included along with any advisors. Most importantly, any person or organization that supplied funding, materials, or facilities needs to be recognized. Any source material regarding background, methodology, or analyses should receive a proper citation in the text. Typically, this is the author or authors' last names and year of publication. If there are more than two authors, usually only the first author is cited along with et al. The details of the paper cited in the text are provided in the references at the end of the paper. Typically, these include the author's publication date, title of paper or chapter, title of book or journal, volume number, and first page number. We have developed a reference format for students to use that suffices for direct submission to some journals. Some reformatting may be necessary for other journals. References are usually listed alphabetically by the first author's last name. No references should be listed if they are not cited in the paper, and vice versa. There must be an exact one-to-one correspondence between citations in the text and references listed at the end of the paper. Cross-check this to make sure this is the case. Now that we are familiar with the overall outline of a scientific paper and what is contained in each section, how should a team go about writing the paper? There are several specific steps that can be taken to organize the writing process. These are dividing up and doing the work, preparing pictures and tables, sending the paper out for external expert review, submission of the paper to a journal for publication. Students in the Astronomy Research Seminar work in teams, and naturally some team members will be more gifted in writing than others. While the many portions of a scientific research paper may appear rather daunting to an individual student, especially in a one-semester seminar, a group of students can divide the work such that each team member only contributes to one or two sections. The paper writing should begin early in the course, even before the observations have been made. After all, the goals and procedures are known and can be modified later on if needed. That way, the introduction and equipment and procedures are drafted early on. Once all of the sections have been written, the sections can be pieced together to create a unified paper. The team should then work through the paper, first at the macroscopic level, ensuring a logical flow, cutting superfluous information, adding important material, and setting the appropriate tone. Once the paper is set in a logical order, the group can then go over the paper at the granular levels using proper English, creating a consistent phraseology, using parallel structures, and consolidating or expanding sentences. One way to make a paper more accessible to the average reader is to add pictures of the researchers in action. The first page in a student paper can include a picture of the entire group, perhaps surrounding the telescope used to make observations, or working on laptops doing analysis, or just standing together in a group photograph. Each picture and table must be referenced and their content summarized in the text of the paper such that they add to the reader's understanding. Pictures and tables must have captions stating what they are. Publication of scientific research in journals open to the public is at the heart of the scientific process. Scientific progress requires that scientists have access to previous research, thus the requirement for publication. In science, the first to publish, not the first to discover, gets the credit. Also at the heart of science is the need for scientists to trust the published results of previous research. External expert review, often by anonymous referees, along with the independent replication of research, is vital to establishing trust. With all of the figures and their captions in place and the text's wording as precise and concise as possible, typically the next step will be submitting the team's paper to the instructor for review. Suggestions for improvement can then be incorporated in the next version of the paper. It is not unusual to go through this process several times before instructor final approval to send the paper out for external review is obtained. After an English check, spelling, grammar, etc., the course instructor or students typically then sends the team's paper to an external reviewer. Reviewers are experienced astronomers who are friends of the research seminar. All of the suggestions or edits the external reviewer makes should be addressed. This includes anything from major questions of procedure and analysis to grammar and spelling. Occasionally, an external reviewer will add an entire section to the paper, often in the analysis. They should be added as a co-author if their contribution is significant enough. All reviewers are thanked in the acknowledgement section of the paper. Once all of the changes and suggestions have been incorporated from reviewers and the paper is checked one last time with proper English, it is ready to be submitted to a journal. The cover letter, actually an email, should formally address the editor of the journal and introduce the team and their overall project. The cover letter does not need to be detailed. In fact, it should be no more than a paragraph or two. The letter should also say something nice about the journal, in particular why the team selected it. Always tell the editor that while the paper has already received external review and is considered by the authors to be final, any suggestions or comments from the journal's editor or additional referees will be addressed. Although the paper will have received considerable informal external review prior to submission of the paper to the journal's editor may send the paper out for formal review by an anonymous expert, often called a referee. Some papers will receive more comments from referees than others. This does not necessarily reflect on the quality of the paper. However, the paper must be revised and each section must be addressed. A final round of edits incorporates any further changes requested by the referee. With these edits complete, the team can resubmit the paper in its new version. Often it is required that the cover email specifically describe how each of the referee's suggestions were addressed in the revised paper. Typically, the editors will give the lead author one final chance to review the proofs of the typeset paper after it has been formatted for publication to check for clerical or typesetting errors. In this unit, we learned how to write a scientific paper, revise a paper based on external reviews, and submit a paper to a journal for publication. The two mottos of this seminar are learn science by doing science, and if it isn't published, it isn't science. Many undergraduate students can and should do scientific research and publish their projects in scientific journals. Doing so will not only advance scientific knowledge, but will advance their careers.